Welcome to What We Didn't Say on Sunday. My name is Jordan Massey. I'm here with David Chauncey, and every week we preach at Westside Baptist Church. David serves as our lead pastor, and I'm our Southwest campus pastor. And when we preach, there are things we don't get to, things left on the cutting room floor, especially on Easter Sunday. And so the purpose of this podcast is to share those things with you, to let you know what we didn't say on Sunday. Well, hey, Pastor David.
Hi, Jordan.
Welcome.
Yeah, good to be here.
We had a great day, didn't we?
And Easter is just awesome. It's awesome every year.
It really is. It's such a great spirit, and we always make this comment, every Sunday is Resurrection Sunday. Yeah. But it's so special to have so many people at both of our campuses who aren't normally here, and they get to hear the gospel. And so... yeah, y'all had a great day here at Newberry Road, I've heard.
Man, it was packed, and services went well, and, I really think people were responding, to the gospel. And were encouraged in the word, so that's all you can hope for.
Good. And
loved by our people. I think we were worried about seating, and we should have been.
That's right.
We had seating issues.
Yeah, I saw that.
But I think our people, I haven't heard any reports that it was really rough. Seating people, so
that's great.
We were a little concerned about that.
Yeah,
people love their favorite seats.
They do, don't they?
I'm the same way. I sit on the same seat every Sunday.
I do as well.
For the first part of worship.
But mine's on the front row, so
where everybody should fight for the front row seats.
We've talked about this before.
Yeah,
because I tell our people all the time, if you sit in the back, you can't hear anyone singing.
Right.
But if you sit in the front, you hear everybody.
But they get to see our facial expressions and really get the full effect of the communication. Maybe that's why they sit in the back.
They don't want it.
Yes.
Yeah, we also had a great day at Southwest. It's just always a great day on Easter. But we got to preach as well. Matthew 28, the resurrection of Jesus, obviously, for Easter Sunday. And there's things that I left on the cutting room floor, even though I've preached this a million times before, it seems like. So we're going to dive into that, and we'll begin with a 3-minute sermon recap like we do every single time we record. So I'm going to get out my clock app here, and Pastor David, you can go first like always. Let us know what you did say on Sunday before we talk about what we didn't say. In 3 minutes or less, your Easter Sunday sermon.
Awesome. Well, it was just a great passage of Scripture where I began by just noticing that Matthew, in one chapter, starts with a dead Messiah, and then at the end of the chapter, a church launched.
Wow.
Something happened in between
20 verses.
In those 20 verses, something massive happened. And the essence of it, and you really came up with this, and I agreed with you on this, is that Matthew ends his gospel, but it's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning of the story, and that the resurrection, and that kind of started my main illustration. My analogy for the whole thing is that the resurrection is not the checkered flag at a race, a NASCAR race. It's the green flag.
So good.
And so it was a green flag for two things. I said, for those of you here, it's a green flag that you can believe in Jesus. It means he is who he said he was. And I went through the various witnesses there, the angelic witness and the all those kind of things. And then I talked about, but it's also a green flag to become what Jesus wants you to become. That he not only wants you to believe in him, he wants us to know he believes in us. Because he takes this ragtag bunch of beat up VWs and turns them into race cars and says, go. And basically at the very end, my application is, you must believe that Jesus is who he said because of the resurrection, and you must become what he has now enabling you to become. And I don't know if I have much time, but basically,
you got a minute.
We can become because of those three or four things he said. All power has been given to me. Nobody's going to do anything to you that I don't allow happen. So race on. Put the metal to the pedal pedal to the metal.
That's right.
And then he says, I also have a purpose, and I talked about this. Jesus' purpose isn't just to save us and take us to heaven. He's committed to glorifying the Father by bearing fruit through this church. And he had told these guys, I'm going to make you fishers of men, and I'm going to build this massive church that the gates of hell cannot prevail. I'm going to do this. They didn't believe him. But the resurrection says he still believes he can do it. Mm-hmm. And he does do it.
Yeah.
And he will do that if we'll not hesitate. And that's kind of where I landed it on, is on that word. It said some doubted.
Yeah.
And really it means some hesitated. Mm-hmm. When the resurrection waves the green flag, and like at NASCAR, those guys don't hesitate.
That's right.
When the green flag goes, it's pedal to the metal. And so that was my sermon.
Wow. Man, that is good. I'll tell you, you admitted that we had a conversation last week and we were talking about sermon prep. And, my main idea was the resurrection is the beginning of the story, not the end. But you know what you did? You did what you always do.
David Chauncey on it.
And it's so much better than what I had on Sunday.
No,
man, that
illustration's
perfect. It's just perfect.
Just different. And but I'll have to admit that I just had lunch with one of our church members, and I was saying that Sunday morning I was very discouraged because I just wasn't sure the whole NASCAR thing was going to work. And I have gotten so many texts just this morning. Thank you. I had one person text me, thank you that you gave me a way to share the gospel with all my NASCAR friends.
There you go.
And I said, well, praise God.
How do you know?
Green flags and checkered flags.
Did you get props?
Now, here's my blooper. I'll go ahead and get to the blooper.
Okay, you go ahead. Yeah.
My props showed up today. I got them a little late. So my green flag and my checkered flag I was actually going to have and wave didn't show up in time. So
you know what your other blooper is?
What?
That you didn't bring it to this recording.
I know. I meant to do that. So I'll probably post my wrapped up green polyester flag and my wrapped up checker flag and say better late than never. But really, it's not better late than never because it's done. But here's the blooper. Think of your main illustration more than 2 days before your sermon, and you have time to order from Amazon. Yeah. But I'm not all. My best illustrations come like 2 or 3 days before my message.
So good.
Props are sometimes not optional.
Oh, that's so good though. Wait to hear my illustration. My illustration is my blooper. So I mean.
All right. Well, do your 3 minutes.
All right. Sermon recap, 3 minutes or less. As already said, my main idea was the resurrection is the beginning of the story, not the end. And I just really wanted to hit this home that this isn't something we just celebrate, something that happened, but that it's a reality that we're called to live in every day, every moment of our lives. So I just kind of had 3 points. The first one was that the resurrection is the beginning of God's final plans for the world. And we've been in Revelation. I talked about Revelation, by the way. We've been in Revelation. And we've seen some similar imagery than that what we get at the beginning of Matthew 28, where there's an angel descending, there's an earthquake, the angel's shining like lightning. We've seen a lot of that imagery in the book of Revelation. And Matthew's actually using apocalyptic imagery because he wants you to see that this is the beginning of the end. This is the beginning of God's final act in human history. And that's something we want to be a part of. That's the story we're being invited into, that God... His redeeming, recreating plan has already begun, and we're called to be a part of that. But then secondly, that it's the beginning of real opposition. And I talked about the conflict that some people feel on Easter Sunday, where we go to church, we talk about hope, we talk about promise, we talk about future, all of this, and then we go back into our messy, complicated lives full of suffering. And I pointed to this interruption, what feels like an interruption in the resurrection story in verses 11 to 15, as an example that the New Testament doesn't say that at the resurrection of Jesus, all things are made right. In fact, the resurrection of Jesus makes things hard for Christians. And we live in between resurrections, the resurrection of Jesus and the resurrection of the saints. And so we realize that we have this future hope, and we don't look to suffering as evidence that the resurrection of Jesus didn't do what it was supposed to do. It's actually evidence that it is still doing what it was supposed to do. So it's the beginning of this real opposition. But then thirdly, as you pointed to so well, it's the beginning of God's work with his people. And go and tell is the reoccurring phrase. Go and tell the disciples, go and tell the people, even the chief priests tell the guards to go and tell the people. Jesus tells the disciples to go and tell. He tells them to go make disciples. And so God is beginning his work with his people here. And we're going to see this lived out more. The day of Pentecost, the Spirit comes and the people of God are empowered. So it's not something we look back to and we celebrate like it happened. We look to this as the beginning of the work that God is doing right now and that we're called to live into. So my application was simple. I had two things. I just get to work. Like we need to get to work. We need to be a part of this story. And then secondly, to trust the power and presence of Jesus that empowers us in this work. So that's very briefly my sermon.
I like all that. I think that's awesome. Great job.
But you already did your sermon blooper. Mm-hmm. So as we get into what we didn't say on Sunday, we kind of begin with sermon bloopers, which are things we didn't want to say that we said, or we meant to say that we didn't say. And you talked about your props not showing up.
Yeah.
My sermon blooper was kind of my illustration itself. I didn't mention it in my recap. I just felt kind of weird about it. I think it worked well. I talked about birthday parties. And how at every birthday party, I go to all kinds of small kids' birthday parties right now because I've got small kids and my friends have small kids. And my small kids...
Are they small or just young?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah.
Both small and young.
Yeah, exactly. Young kids.
Maybe they just thought you had older kids that were really small.
That's fair.
I just wanted to clarify.
That's a helpful
young children.
clarification.
Not just small.
For the audience. But at every young kid's birthday party, there are the same kinds of people. And all of those folks have a different kind of relationship with the kid at the party. And there are the parents on one side of the spectrum where they are totally involved in that kid's life. The kid is born. That's not the end of the story for them. That story continues. Every single moment of their life, they're involved, they're invested. But then on the other side of the spectrum, there's like the distant aunt or uncle or the cousin or somebody. And their relationship to that kid is they go to that kid's birthday parties. That's their involvement in that kid's life. And so I talked about how for those people, the birth of the child is the end of the story. And every year they just come back and they celebrate that the child was born.
Whoa, what an Easter analogy there.
It was great. However, part of me felt like I was just trashing the people who were there.
You were.
For the first time and hadn't been there for a long time.
You were. I think that was very clear.
So I tried to provide enough caveats and clarifiers that you can be this way and go to church every Sunday.
Right.
Because you can. Like, we've probably got people in our church family, they just go to a weekly birthday party where they just celebrate something that happened and they move on with their lives. So I tried to do that, but I knew a part of me was just, thanks for being here. We'll see you next year. Like, that kind of mentality. But anyways,
that is something that every Easter I fight, is the desire to pick on the Christmas and Easter only crowd.
Yeah.
And you want to speak to that and challenge them. And I was trying to do that through the analogy, and that, you're hesitating. You're hesitating for fear of full commitment.
Yeah.
Why did these guys hesitate? They weren't. They knew Jesus was alive.
Yeah.
Just like everybody here knows he's alive. But we're hesitating because we doubt maybe something about what Jesus is saying, that the life he's going to provide isn't what we want. We don't like the direction the racetrack's going. We're not sure he's, gonna, we're hesitating for some reason. And to me, this bold resurrection is like, listen, if he's got all authority, that's kind of my preaching point. So I hope they picked it up subtly that there's no reason just coming to the race once a year.
Yeah. Yeah.
Be in it every day. But that's good that you added the qualifiers. That probably helped a little.
I think so. And I will say I was reassured because in our 9:30 service we had a ton of new families, and there was one family I had met before the service that it kind of gave an indication of they were what we call CEOs or Christmas Easter only. And the father of that family was just nodding in affirmation the whole time. And I was like, all right, well, maybe I'm hitting home here. So anyways, that was my blooper. Anything else that you did?
Well, it's not fair, but we did have a sunrise service.
We did?
And,
with no sun.
No sun. It might have been a blooper that we had the thing outside because it was destroying every lady's hairdo.
Oh, man.
It was...
I didn't even think about that.
My iPad was...
How was your hair, Bo?
My hair was wet.
Yes, my head was wet. My clothes, they dried off pretty quickly, but I kept having to wipe the screen. There was enough moisture misting onto my iPad, I couldn't read the words. That's how... It wasn't raining, but it was as close to rain as you can get without raining.
Yeah.
And we had that outside, but with all of that distraction, I thought I just kind of blooped my way through that sunrise.
It's hard to stay focused.
It's so hard to focus, and
especially you're worried about. You're not just thinking about your sermon,
right?
You're not just thinking about the fact you can't read. You're thinking about the lady's hair.
I'm worried about
people being uncomfortable. You've got all of that on your mind. You're probably thinking about, is this sound equipment gonna break?
Yeah,
like, we're gonna have to spend money to. It's just hard to focus.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was there. Us Floridians, we just don't know what to do with mist.
Yeah,
because we don't get it very often.
Now, I personally loved it. Now, I liked the vibe, but I was feeling it for everybody else out there. You know, some of these folks don't really want to be here.
It'd have been great if, right as you were pointing to the resurrection, the sun would have broke through.
That would have been perfect.
And the rain would have dissipated.
Mm-hmm.
God clearly had other plans.
But I was amazed how many people showed up and sat out in the rain.
I know.
At 7 a.m. And so people love that. But there's a lot of people, that's all they give us, is that
sunrise service.
Yep. Once a year. And so there's a lot of pressure sometimes to feel like you've got to hit a home run.
Yeah.
You've got to give this unbelievable gospel presentation. And I've tried to relieve myself of that pressure. And I have discovered that it's so exciting that the Lord, you get so excited to preach when you see the crowds and all of that, that you normally do pretty well. You focus well and all that thing. I don't get nearly as distracted. But I just leave the home run thing in the Lord's hands.
Yeah.
If it turns out great or not, I do the work. I do the best I can.
Yeah.
But I got up that morning thinking they're going to think this is the green flag, checkered flag thing. I can't believe I'm going to do this on an Easter Sunday. And I'm telling you, it worked.
Yeah.
And but something that worked maybe even better is I was telling the story about how these disciples knew they had just messed up, and they can't believe Jesus still wants to use them. Mm-hmm. And I used an illustration of, because I was talking about driving and everything, that my mother, I was riding in the car, driving her car on the interstate, which her and I don't drive on the interstate together. This doesn't happen, the two of us alone. And we're out on the interstate, and I'm drinking a coffee, and I put it down in the door. She says, "Keep your eyes on the road." And I looked up. I said, "Okay, Mom." You know, I'm 56 years old. She goes, "You remember what happened the last time?" And the audience started laughing because they knew what was coming. I said, what she was referring to happened 40 years ago, and she had not forgotten that with my learner's permit, I was driving on an interstate, and I'd leaned over and put a Coke can between the door and my seat to hold it. And when I looked up, I'd gone off onto the median and whipped it and ended up spinning. It came to a dead stop.
What?
Facing oncoming traffic on Interstate 81 in Virginia. And so people, the older folks were laughing so hard because they knew that.
Yeah.
But it is a blooper. I had to apologize to my mom. I did not ask her permission to share that.
Yeah.
But she does know it's all true.
That's fair.
She is there for confirmation. But I have some many bloopers driving. You have any wreck stories like that? I'm surprised I'm alive.
I've never been in a car accident.
Mm-hmm.
I am a sleepy driver.
Ooh.
So especially in high school, I fell asleep at the wheel a few times.
Yeah, that's scary.
It is scary. You don't like waking up with your vehicle on the sidewalk. Which has happened to me, unfortunately,
that's not good.
more than one time. So, but nothing crazier than that, although that is pretty crazy now that I say it out loud. Well, hey, let's continue with what we didn't say on Sunday and think about historical context. There's so much here as we think about the resurrection. We get this story, obviously, in all four Gospels, and there's so much here happening in the history of the event, behind the scenes, perhaps, that I didn't have time to get to. There's a number of things I can mention. You want me to go first? Then you can, or you want to go first?
No, you go ahead.
Okay.
That's awesome.
All right, I'll go first. A few things. I'd always read this passage. First of all, these are just some random things about this text that I'll mention that don't have a ton of implication, but I'd always thought there were two guards. Like there's three wise men. There were two guards. We're never told how many guards are there. And I think there's good indication that there's quite a bit more than two. They really want to secure this tomb. And so more than two, which to me makes this encounter in 11 to 15 all the more damning for the chief priests, that potentially 10 or so men, that they are respected enough to make guards come to them and tell them this story, and yet they still choose to lie and manipulate and lead people away from Jesus. So that was one thing. There's obviously, we look to all four gospel accounts and we see, what do we do with these different ways in which the story is told? And we talked about this last week with the triumphal entry being told differently. And I didn't deal with that at all. But if you read these stories, in every gospel writer is emphasizing something different. And so Matthew's telling this story in a particular way. John tells the story in a particular way. Mark, Luke, they're all telling the story in a very particular way. Mark's gospel ends with the women leaving in fear. They don't ever even make it to the disciples. John's gospel, Jesus has this really intimate one-on-one encounter with Mary Magdalene at the garden. And then in Matthew, you have some other details happening. And Mark's gospel also, the young man is inside of the tomb. He's not sitting on the stone. There's a young man inside of the tomb. So I think it's important for our folks to know that these, in what a cynical mind might think of as contradictions.
Yeah.
That first of all, contradictions and stories, if you might call them that, which I wouldn't, inconsistencies maybe, often, historically speaking, are not indications of fabrication. They're indications of authenticity. If you had four stories that were told identically at every single beat and note, you would question the authenticity of those stories if they're real eyewitness accounts. So if we just think historically, these kind of differences in the way the story is told is great evidence of authenticity. Also, if you're trying to fabricate, you would want to make sure that every single one of those stories lined up perfectly. But also, just remember that every gospel writer is emphasizing something different. And Mark is doing something with the young man inside the tomb. And I think he's connecting that young man, who I believe is an angel in that story, but he's connecting that young man to the young man who runs away naked. As Jesus is arrested. And that young man is wearing new clothes. His clothes were torn off of him. And even the same word is used for what Jesus is wrapped in. He's taken to the tomb, and now this young man has new clothing. And so Mark is emphasizing what the cross does for us. We get this exchange of clothing. John, all throughout his gospel, he's emphasizing Jesus's relationships with his friends. And we see these one-on-one encounters that Jesus has. Some of the more famous stories of Jesus with the woman at the well, Jesus with Nicodemus, Jesus' conversation with Mary and Martha at the death of Lazarus, all of these close encounters. And at the tomb, we get that as well, this close encounter with Mary. And she sees her rabbi, and this just really cool thing. So every gospel writer is emphasizing something different. That doesn't mean the details they include are contradictory.
Yeah.
It simply means that they're telling a different part of the story, to make a different point, and we read them together as a unified story. I didn't deal with any of that at all on Sunday.
No, and I think Matthew chapter 28 is best seen as as in a whole, because it's basically like this is why we're going on a Great Commission.
Yeah.
And to me, I didn't get into what I saw as something interesting is that the first people that bowed and worshiped Jesus in the book of Matthew were the Magi from the east. That word worship is used there. They said, we want to go and worship the new king. And then it says they fell and worshiped him. Well, it's used a few more times in Matthew, but then we have it twice in the last chapter. And so it's Gentiles worshiping him at the beginning. And then the last verse is sending them out to reach the Gentiles.
Yeah.
Finally, the Jewish folks are worshiping him in the tomb. And they're falling at his feet. So I think there's something there that I wanted to talk about, this idea of worshiping him. And what mountain was it that they went to in Galilee? There's a whole lot of speculation on that. Was it the same Mount of Transfiguration? Would they have gathered there? Or maybe it was something like where he did the Sermon on the Mount. There's so much to talk about there, but you could dive into those details and miss what I really felt like this text was telling us is this is why we can go. We have a risen Savior. We have a message to tell, and this is the resurrection is where it shows that he has the authority to send us out and accomplish the task. And that's the message, isn't it?
Yeah. Absolutely.
Of Matthew 28, and that's what we were preaching. And so I've done other Easter sermons, like I had one called CSI Jerusalem, and a long time ago. And I went through all the evidences and all the arguments. And like the silly argument in Matthew's, I'm still struggling with this. That argument, of all the ones that Matthew could have chosen to say that this is still circulating, the guards sleeping is the lousiest argument. It's the weakest. That they would have slept. And it was probably 8. Now, some say that it was a Roman guard. They had sealed it with an official Roman seal, which these guys would have been killed if they had fallen asleep. Now, there's some argument, maybe it wasn't. It was just the Sanhedrin's guards. But these weren't mall cops.
No.
And I didn't say mall cop in
because there might have been mall cops.
I did not say mall cop on Sunday morning. Because I wanted to so badly, but I was afraid there would have been a mall security guard that would have been offended. So I didn't dive into all of that, those stories, because you can't say we fell asleep and the disciples came in and stole the body because you were asleep. How do you know who came in and stole the body?
Exactly.
And here's a blooper from my sermon that you have to hear.
Okay.
I had it in my outline. I took it out. I had the rock. The earthquake was the tectonic witness. I had the angelic witness. I had the euphoric witness of the women praising God, and I had the prophetic witness of Jesus saying, "I'm going to do this." And then I had the pathetic witness of the guards. I did not put that on my outline, but I did say it a few times.
You did say it.
So I'm not sure. Should I have
witness?
Tectonic witness?
Could be a band name.
That is how bad.
Tectonic witness.
That's how bad my disease is. My alliteration disease.
I love it.
Take medicine for it.
I love it. Yeah, there's so much there with that passage of verses 11 to 15 that we could go on and on about. And why does Matthew include this? Some
why
might
didn't he have Peter and John came into the tomb? Why didn't he include that?
Correct.
Very interesting.
And Mark is the most precise because, well, he's the shortest. I think Matthew's the most precise because Matthew tells a bigger story than Mark does but he tells it in a very, very precise way. So you don't get those other details of Peter and John and the race that John tells us about and all of this, the encounter on the road to Emmaus. All of these things aren't included in Matthew's gospel because, as you've hinted at already, I think Matthew is doing something very intentional, which is this is a commissioning narrative.
Right.
This is all about
Go and tell.
the resurrected King has commanded us to go and tell, to make disciples, and he's got that precise focus on that, and I think it's intentional that, again, as we said already, the guards are told to go and tell. That there's other people who are going and telling, but why he tells a story, I think it's not necessarily a polemic. Like some people will think that, well, Matthew's trying to deal with these arguments in his context. But because it's such a bad one, I don't think Matthew's concerned that people are going to be dissuaded by this. I think he's using it as evidence of the ridiculousness of anyone who would counter the resurrection of Jesus. So he picks one of the more ridiculous arguments against it. Man, there's so much here we could talk about. In every gospel, the first witnesses are women, and the significance of that. And again, if you're going to fabricate a story in the first century world, you wouldn't have women as the first witnesses, not because women aren't credible, because they weren't deemed as credible. I didn't spend much time with the Great Commission because we're focusing on the resurrection, but it's so much a part of that. But we could get into the nitty-gritty of what Jesus means when he tells them to make disciples. What's the context for that? What does it mean to make a disciple? So there's so much with historical context we could get into. Let's talk about literary context as well, though. That is some of the other stuff that's left on the cutting room floor. And the one thing I'll mention for me is, and again, maybe there's a direct line to Revelation in every passage of Scripture. Because, I mean, Jesus is very clearly calling on Daniel 7 in Matthew 28, verse 18, when he says, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. And if you know your Gospel of Matthew well, you know the Son of Man is one of the primary themes, that Jesus is the promised Son of Man of Daniel 7. I didn't talk about this at all, but in Daniel 7, I'll just read this. This is Daniel 7, verse 14. And to him, the Son of Man, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. So once again, another reminder that this is the beginning. This is the beginning of the kingdom of Jesus, and we live in between the first coming and the second coming, and we know at the second coming Jesus will finally install his kingdom. But it's nonetheless, the beginning has started of this new kingdom where all peoples, nations, and languages will serve Jesus. So, but I didn't talk about that at all.
Yeah, people will say that we're in the latter days now, but really the latter days started with the resurrection.
Correct.
We've been in the latter days for a long time because we're in this kingdom building time.
Yep. Anything for you as far as literary context goes? You already mentioned, which I think is helpful, the Gospel of Matthew, and we have 3 mountaintop experiences that are critical in the Gospel of Matthew. We have the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus reveals what his kingdom looks like. We have the Transfiguration, where Jesus reveals his divine nature to his disciples, or however you describe his glory. And then we have this revelation of Jesus as the resurrected King sending his disciples out. Anything else literary context for you?
No, I think we covered enough on that.
Anything related to theological ideas that you'd want to mention?
You've already mentioned a few that we just couldn't get to in terms of, I think it's interesting we could have talked about this baptismal Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Why did he say baptize them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit? Where did that come from? So there's a lot of theology there that even in that he's claiming that same kind of authority to put himself into that mix is incredible. And the idea of all nations, I think Matthew is designed to really speak well to people who knew the Old Testament. He's constantly quoting Old Testament. But throughout, he's showing that this is to reach Gentiles. It's for the nations. And so the missiology is a big thing that we could have talked about here, the mission that Jesus is sending these folks out on.
Yeah. And within that, what we also see, and Luke really emphasizes this in Acts 1, when the disciples ask, when will you restore the nation of Israel? And then Jesus responds with, it's not for you to know, but I'm going to send my Spirit. Some people think that Jesus is saying, it's not for you to know. Also, by the way, I'm going to send my Spirit. I think a plain reading of that is that Jesus is saying, oh, I'm going to restore the nation of Israel when I send my Spirit. And what we see happening is really cool, is that all of the apostles are what? Jewish. And it's Jewish people who are gathered in Jerusalem at Pentecost that receive the Spirit of God, and it's Jewish people who are sent out to who? To the nations.
To the nations, yeah.
And so the other really cool thing as we think about the context of God's redemptive history is that God has always intended to use his people, Israel, to be a blessing to and reach the nations. And the resurrected Jesus is empowering, finally, in its fullness, the people of Israel to do that. And that's what we see happening right in the book of Acts. And then the gospel goes from Jew to Gentile. That's the movement. In the book of Acts, it's what Paul explicitly states in his letters. And so I just love that kind of fulfillment of, we also see, it's not the complete and total and final fulfillment, but it's the beginning of the fulfillment of what God always intended for his people, that they would reach the nations. And we're the benefits of that.
Absolutely.
So, all right, so that's theological ideas. Any illustrations? It sounds like you got to them.
I got to all of my illustrations.
Yeah. I don't ever have any, so I didn't get to mine either. The ones I didn't have.
I was very proud that I wanted to preach a shorter sermon this Sunday, and I did.
Praise God.
I think both were under 40 minutes. I know the first one was under 40 minutes. So I didn't add stuff that I left on the cutting room floor.
That's right.
I pretty much said everything I had in there.
There we go. Good. All right. Hey, we are now entering a new era of what we didn't say on Sunday. We teased this last week and the week before that we were going to start a new segment where folks were allowed to ask questions that we would answer live, hearing it the first time right here on the show. So we have 2 questions, right, Bo?
This is correct.
All right. So we've got 2 questions coming our way. You and I, we've never heard these questions. We're shooting from the hip here, which means don't trust our answers. But
I've also never read these questions, so it's going to be even more fun.
Okay. All right. Let's hear it, Bo.
Do we want to know the person who submitted it?
Yeah, I think so.
If they're brave enough to submit it.
Yeah, if they're
That's
brave
fair.
enough, that should be known.
All right, first person, Jimmy Gary.
Oh, sweet.
Oh.
Okay, here we go.
Says, hi, pastors. I think this question indirectly relates to your sermons. Prior to Jesus' resurrection in chapter 28, Matthew records the resurrection of saints in 27:50 through 53. So, ... Bo reads in his best Seinfeld voice. What's the deal with that?
What is the deal with that?
He put the Seinfeld thing in there?
Yes.
Oh, I love Jimmy.
Well, that is one of the stranger things that happens.
Yeah.
In the gospel, and honestly, I think it's a I've always interpreted it to be part of that first fruits of the resurrection to just kind of demonstrate that something significant happened at the crucifixion, that Jesus was setting captives free, and maybe this was just a way of God demonstrating that that this affected those who were faithful in Israel, those Old Testament saints, and that it was part of the fulfillment of what they had been looking for. But it's I don't have a lot on that I really have strong convictions about.
Yeah. It is one of the, I agree with you. To me, it's one of the stranger parts of the narrative. The only things I would say that I have conviction about is that I think one of the conclusions we can make. Now, here's the question that maybe Jimmy is getting at, or the question that I don't have an answer for, is what kind of resurrection is this?
Did they die again?
Correct.
Yes.
Is this a resurrection that they have been given new bodies, resurrected bodies that are fit for eternity, and that they are in their eternal state now? Or is this a kind of resurrection like Lazarus, where their previous bodies are reanimated and they live and then they die again? I don't got an answer for that.
Yeah.
I'm just asking more questions. I'm not giving answers here.
Jimmy stumped us already.
But what I will say is the conclusion we can draw from this that is significant is that Jesus really dies. And this is, people talk about, well, did Jesus go to hell? We would look at the First Peter text, and Paul even kind of gets at this in Ephesians 4. He descended below the earth. Well, what is this about? I think for the person living in the first century world, and be careful here, I don't think they thought when people died they either went to heaven or hell, because those concepts and those final destinations are something that the gospel speaks to and that the New Testament provides clarity on. And so where did you go when you die? Well, you went to the place of where dead people go. Like the Old Testament calls this Sheol. And so in the Old Testament, the blessing for righteousness is what? That you live a long time, because no one wants to go to Sheol. No one wants to go to the place of the dead. So I think what we see happening here is that Jesus goes to the place of the dead.
Yeah.
And Peter says that he speaks to the prisoners there. And I think that might be what we see happening here. Yeah. That he's gone to the place of the dead and he's freed some people.
Yes. Yes.
He's freed some people while they're there, and they go up to tell people what Jesus has done. So that's just a conclusion, and I just opened up about 18 million Pandora's boxes. I recognize that.
Good question.
That's
Very
a great
good question
from King James.
King James.
That's right.
All right, second and final question of the week. Spencer Thomas, who is a youth intern.
Yeah.
Why do each of the Gospels give a different depiction of what happened at the tomb in relation to the angel? Matthew says there was an angel of the Lord sitting on the stone. Mark says a man in white clothes sitting inside of the tomb. And Luke says 2 men in white glowing clothes standing outside of the tomb.
Well, we kind of already answered this, didn't we?
Yeah.
Not specific to the angel. So, Spencer, if you're listening, rewind and listen again to what we said. But I think in relation to the angel specifically, that there's no reason for us to believe there weren't 3 angels there, and maybe 4, and another angel inside the tomb.
Matthew did not say there was only one angel.
Correct.
He didn't say there's only one angel. He only mentioned one angel.
Yeah.
And so it allows the possibility that there were more.
Correct. And the gospel writers are spotlighting these different elements, and I think Matthew is emphasizing with the Son of Man theme in Matthew 28. He's emphasizing this kind of apocalyptic nature. So he wants you to look at the angel who's sitting on top of that stone. That kind of, he descends. I made this noise. I'll make it again. Like, right. He descends from heaven. It's it's this dramatic scene. He's sitting on top of the stone. Matthew wants you to see that. Mark wants you to see the young man, the angel who's wearing the clothes and reminding us of the young man who ran away. And so it's all about emphasis.
Yeah.
And there's no reason for us to think that there couldn't have been 4 angels there or more.
And you get the feeling that this happened over a period of time. These visits to the tomb, they weren't all there at the same time.
Correct.
So maybe there was only one angel when these 2 Marys showed up.
Yeah.
And then a third Mary may have come a little at a different time, and Peter and John came at a different time, but they all came that morning and had their experiences with the angel. And 2, it's disorienting. Even in this story, this angel's got a disorienting effect. They're scared to death.
Yeah.
The men are shaking. They're like dead men.
Yeah.
And even the women are full of fear.
Yeah.
And he has to tell them, don't be afraid.
Yeah.
And so it's not like they're seeing everything totally clearly.
Yeah.
Which to me speaks, like you said earlier, to the authenticity of the event.
That's right.
If they all matched identically, something I would
That's suspicious.
weren't really involved.
That's right. Well, that was a fun segment.
All right.
Hey, this has been a great episode of What We Didn't Say on Sunday, and we're going to preach again. We're back in Revelation.
Oh,
Revelation 6.
man.
Blood moons, 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Very excited.
There's going to be a lot, at least for me, that I don't get to on Sunday. And so, like always, next week we'll be back with you to share more about what we didn't say on Sunday.